colleagues, it's 9 o'clock, so I'm officially opening the meeting. I just want to welcome all the members, both online and physically present, as well as the liquor board that's going to be giving us a presentation today. Also to the observers that have joined us. Just to remind you of the purpose of this, it's good to have a check-in with the Liquor Authority in any event, but given that we have to fill vacancies on the liquor board, the committee thought it fit that we inform ourselves, refresh ourselves before we deliberate on that we have a good understanding of strategically where the Liquor Authority is going. And also when we consider the vacancies, how we fit people into the strategy going forward. So it's going to be useful for us. So it's two birds with one stone. I would also like to just, on behalf of the committee, to Member Boyson, you had a bereavement in your family. Just wanted to convey the committee's condolences, and we are here for you. You are one of us as well. And then perhaps on a lighter note, congratulate Member Kaiser Philander for a victory over the traffic this morning. We thought you were not going to make it on time and you're going to be online, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
So if I can ask, first of all, the members, I'll start with the members in the physically present. You can just, for the record, introduce yourselves, and then I'll move over to the members online. I'm Thomas Walters. I'm chairperson of the committee.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honourable members, all guests of the Delegated Authority, all members perhaps online. My name is Wendy Kaiser Philander, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning to our officials. I'm Member Boyson, and I'm a member of this committee. Thank you.
If I can ask our online members just to introduce yourselves for the record.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Benedicta van Minnen, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, Chairperson and everyone else. Aisha Kasim, I'm a member of this committee.
My name is Benson Lenzo, a member of this committee. Thank you.
Good. Then Member Stevens, we had a message that she has a medical appointment, but I'm assuming she will be joining us. Otherwise, we can record it as an apology. If I can ask the Liquor Board or Liquor Authority, as I sort of broadly refer to it, if I can ask you to introduce yourselves.
Chairperson and members, thank you very much. Good morning. I'm the only person here representing the Western Cape Liquor Authority, and I head up the administration at the Western Cape Liquor Authority. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson and members. I'm Julian Lutz. I represent the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety. If we could also just note an apology for our acting HOD, Mr. Hilton Ardense. He's unfortunately not able to be with us this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson and members. I'm Dion Prince from the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety.
Thank you very much. So we can get straight into it. If I can ask the Liquor Authority, well, on the agenda it says Liquor Authority / Department to present to us. So I'm handing over to you. If you can just perhaps speak into the microphone.
I think I'd rather use this one. Okay, so if you can go to the first slide, I see we went straight. Or do you want me straight to go to the governing board? Or is that intentional, Chairperson? Okay. So if we prepare the slide based on the brief that we've received, Chairperson and members. So if you can go to I think the first one is in relation to, I think, what the Western Cape Liquor Authority is all about in terms of its vision, and then also its stated objectives. Now, fundamentally, it's not progressing. So, okay, sorry. Second one. Okay, so the vision essentially then is a public interest served through the liquor licensing and through liquor licensing and regulation. So I would like to explain this, and I think we're at pains in terms of how we frame this. So essentially is if you sit back and you think of generally society's interest, and you think of the retail sale of liquor, then you have to look at it within that context. How is the public interest generally served in regulating liquor? And I think fundamentally, if we're all committed to that, I think we all understand that we have joint responsibilities to ensure that liquor does not have an adverse effect and impact on society generally. And I think that's an important statement to look at as a vision. In defining it that way, Chairperson and members, I think it's necessary for us to understand that we all have a role to play, no matter where we may find ourselves in terms of our professional lives, but also in terms of conducting and doing business within the Western Cape. The mission, it's stated also clearly, regulate the retail sale and micro manufacturing. That is what the mandate is, and it's framed as such within our legislation. In that, what we do is to facilitate and promote the determination of public interest in all regulatory processes. Essentially, again, we facilitate the determination. The determination is made within a quasi-judicial body within the Western Cape Liquor Authority, which is the Liquor Licensing Tribunal. The Liquor Licensing Tribunal, in terms of its decisions, appeal and review thereof is then possible by virtue of approaching the Appeal Tribunal, which is also provided for within the Act. What is our mission further in terms of fostering an appreciation for effective regulation? I think what we're trying to do very much in terms of the Western Cape Liquor Authority, as much as we understand our role to regulate, we also would like to develop an appreciation that it's better that we have a society where this is regulated in a manner that we can get to understand that it serves in all of our collective interest. So if you look at, for instance, provisions within the King 4 report, it clearly there understands that while initially, if you go look at the reports 1 and 2, maybe you'll find a direct correlation between shareholder interest and the profitability of the organization and the responsibility of those heading those organizations to ensure that they serve the interest of this. Now, when you start looking at fourth, it speaks about the sustainability of institutions, including corporations, to ensure that our society, basically, the business is sustainable within the context of society. And I think that is a very important consideration and development over the last few years. And then very importantly, I think something that has been introduced is that ultimately we do understand that we're, within the environment, the regulatory environment, we're hoping to attract the best possible people. That speaks to getting them to serve the public interest and to serve the public generally, which will include applicants especially as well. Thank you, Chair. That ends our vision and mission. What are the strategic objectives and goals? These are very closely aligned to generally what is provided for within the documentation and the narrative that we now have published in the strategic plan of the Western Cape government, the strategic plan of our custodial department, and then also here you find it expressed and related to by the Western Cape Liquor Authority. We need to be an efficient and effective administration of all license application processes. Fundamentally, I think we need to recognize that this essentially is an ongoing challenge in terms of government generally and bureaucracies for that matter. To what extent are we ensuring a lean capacity to actually have the same capacity and the same impact in terms of our systems and processes? Increasingly, this is moving towards an automation and ease of application of business and accessibility to, I think, institutions of government. Then, of course, to ensure all licenses are granted and operate in a manner respecting public interest. Again, it's reaching out to understand to even all those applicants and to communities that they can insist that licenses are operated in a manner that respects them, respects their communities, respects the environments within which they find themselves. Aligning government priorities and institutions to optimize capacity, I think the need there simply is stating the following. We have to seek better alignment so that we optimize resources. We cannot create institutions or platforms within our society or within our communities and each of us go and try to create platforms. We have to synergize and make those platforms work for all of us. So it constitutes an asset, both for the department that initiates it, but more importantly, also for others that wish to be on the agenda whenever we meet with communities and engage them. It's a very important thing. I believe it's one of the ways in we will optimize resources that are so limited and strained at this given point in time. We will not escape in terms of our growth and development the need to innovate and the need for us to ensure that innovation, again, allows us to do so much more, allows us to expedite our process, allows us to be able to be responsive to our clients. Then the learning, again, this relates to, as I've indicated, a new objective within the organization, which is to focus on the need to optimize human capital. You may not have much flexibility when it comes to a goods and services budget, but if you have a budget in relation to people, personnel, human capital, the opportunities are endless in terms of what you can possibly extract and develop in terms of people's growth. And I think there's a need for us to appreciate that in the organization, and that is also a specific objective. And then finally, Chairperson, effective governance and oversight of the administration. Herein lies the role of the governing board very pertinently, and this is clearly indicated and outlined by the Act. There's a slide specifically that will deal and speak to that aspect. Thank you, Chair. Chair, if I'm going too slow, I can skip a few slides. Then I think what are our challenges as an organization? I think fundamentally ICT as a tool for efficient processing of applications. Now, we have never had within the WCLA since its establishment and since its detachment from a department in the Western Cape, which was then, I think, DDAT, it has never acquired capacity to directly deal with ICT. Okay. So if you think of what is being done by other entities and institutions, other departments, retail, online sales, all of this, if you just think of what is happening in that space, in terms of where the Western Cape Liquor Authority is in terms of its systems and ICT process, the interaction between us and our clients, the interaction between us and our communities, that has been left behind for a very long time. And that primarily because in terms of the budget realities, we would look to those services coming from those that are already taking our budget in this regard. So CETA as an instance. So you're very reliant on CETA on providing basic systems of automation, such as being able to facilitate your procurement around your licenses, for instance, for internet services, and then the other one being Bulugeko, which is then our service providers in terms of our internal mechanism or our records processes in relation to licenses. That is the LMAT system, and we're very dependent on that. So the growth and development there was not necessarily related to our always aligned to the strategic vision of the organization. And then also because we didn't have the champion, I think there was limited understanding of how important ICT is as a tool for growth and development. Now we're paying the price for that, unfortunately, and that is a reality. But we've reversed that, and I will speak to that. We have now a dedicated ICT champion. For the last year, considerable developments. The first win was, of course, extracting greater value for our current service providers, looking at CETA and looking at them. So the responses we're getting from them, the performance against what they undertook to provide is so much better now already. Of course, platforming the organization going forward, now the board has requested that we look at our spend in that space and ask ourselves, is that optimal for our spend going forward? Would it be enabling to continue with that, or is there a need for us to look at alternatives that will allow us greater traction and that, for instance? But of course, it will be a process. And as everybody knows, should we embark upon that process, it is then possibly a once-off capital injection that is required in order for us to do that. I think that's the important thing. The other thing I'd like to register, and I know I'm just like, is that with any of these changes, I think the biggest challenge to that is the ability of your capital human resource to transform to that new way of doing things, to evolve and to accept the challenge that change brings in that environment. Stakeholder legislative partners, I think SAPS and local government. The key thing there, oh no, I have to concentrate on the second bullet as well. So, Chairperson, over and above the ICT that are related to, for instance, 4 years ago on arriving at the Western Cape Liquor Authority, very clearly what I was confronted with immediately was that the people that were reporting to me were operational in nature. But no point was there a level in the organization of executive accountability and responsibility up until then. So I came in, I was then put at particular, I was solely then responsible for that executive level of accountability. The organization went on for about 10 years, 12 years in that respect. We immediately initiated what was called then, which is now called or termed the EY report, which is an OD organizational development project to ascertain the correct or to determine, in line with the strategy, a resourcing by virtue of the structure that you wish to introduce. With that being said, Chairperson, again, as with the previous work study report that was never initialized, introduced, I should, or implemented, the level of work was quite clearly apparent. I can now safely say that we have addressed that particular challenge within the context of we now having approved and have obtained concurrence from the department and the OD component within the department of the Premier for the introduction of that level. So I will now have 2 directors. That decision or that adoption of the implementation will happen on Friday, hopefully, and after that I will be able to fill those 2 positions. Now, initially, I heavily reflected on this within the context of leadership of the organization. Over time now, and the challenges in terms of all the things that we were driving and the challenges we experienced in implementing it, Chairperson, and I have to concede that the issue was establishing also greater accountability and performance in relation to the individuals that had to drive those change, that change. Now, the span of control then is basically like 8 or 9 reporting to me directly. That will now reduce to 2, and each of those executive managers would now, within the cluster of work, be responsible for 1, the operations, and the other being what you would associate with corporate services generally. So you're looking at personnel, you would be looking at ICT, you would be looking at finance, and then also you would be looking at the entire record systems, all of those in relation to the organization. So understanding that and the need for that to be driven as a cluster of work, or family of work, so to speak. I mean, there's considerable capacitation going in there, and that within the next year, you will probably see remarkable results based on the ability to drive the performance-related aspects of the organization. Now, organizational performance, I think we've been monitoring very closely. But in terms of the individual performance and related to that, I mean, there should have been, and establishing accountability in that space is, I think, where this will now realize much better. That then on that aspect, going forward, Chairperson, I think the stakeholders and legislative partners, bear in mind that within the Act there are 2 partners, and we call them legislative partners simply because we have to cooperate with them at that particular level. And that is in terms of the public interest, unpacking the deliberations around that. Those reports compiled by local government and compiled by the DLO are critical to enable the Western Cape, the Liquor Licensing Tribunal, to apply their minds as far as the public interest is concerned, bearing in mind that each license granted must be granted if the LLT is satisfied that the public interest will be served by doing so. I think that is just an important thing we have to recognize and say that that's what the legislation essentially says. I think in terms of what we have responded to there, bear in mind that here you have delays, you'd have certain things. So we even embarked 2 years ago on a massive drive engaging local government and all the municipalities in the Western Cape. We've utilized SALGA for that purposes, and we've also then traveled along the length and breadth of the province to get to each of the municipalities. The message was simply just what we've indicated to you now, but also more importantly, to indicate to them how important the reports coming from them are in terms of that. The holdup, if that is not available, is considerable. The LRT will just simply say they can't deal with it if we don't have an understanding of what local government's approach or the attitude is towards this. We've tried several things, Chairperson, including, of course, moving there and members, but also more importantly, we've done engagements around education and training, especially with the DLOs. Our challenge with the DLOs is very specific. DLOs are granted 2 other responsibilities in most of the stations. The one is in relation to pressure, the metal, and the special conditions, the special prosecutorial arrangements around cabling and the like, and stolen goods for that matter, I may say. And the other is firearms, which is also a very specific register for the area and all processes that need to go, facilitating and channeling that. So if you look at those 3 areas of specialization, they are all lumped on the same person, right? That's the one thing. But I think more importantly, what is challenging there is the turnover of staff in that particular space, because one just gets moved the other one. So if you're good here and they need somebody good elsewhere, then you'll have to go there. That's just simply how operationally the deployment of staff is considered, and it's very difficult to counter those arguments. So what did we respond to that? We responded by arguing, listen, if we have a good and comprehensive understanding of what presents as challenges in any given area, then that in and of itself will go a long way to ensure that we are able to determine public interest in that area. So which means if I have a report that says that within George municipality, I use that because that's the one that's on the table and we're trying to refine that very well as well. So if you unpack George essentially in terms of all its challenges, then you'd come to the conclusion based on the report that if you target and focus on Thembalethu, you are going to basically address 80% of the challenges within the George area. And understanding then that the optimal utilization of your resources is towards targeting that. Then you also understand that, okay, if you unpack that even further, Chairperson and members, is what category of license is problematic in that particular space. It's not all of them. So on-consumption license is probably in terms of the hours, is probably the most challenging license. But within that category is also the nature of the business. That is important. And the nature of the business is, if you're a pub, a bar and the like, you're selling liquor. If you're a restaurant, you're selling food. And in terms of understanding that and what presents, the hours of a restaurant, much less, the hours of a pub and going straight into it. And if you look in the Southern Cape, that goes to 4 right now. And I think understanding those couple of things. So if you have a report that says that, can you judge how easy it's going to be to compile a report for the area with the assistance? So the guidance from our license inspectors, is then so easy. They can basically present a draft for consideration by them. The issue with the local government has been that they would send it to a department within the municipality, and the department give a response. However, the response will be, if you send it to fire, they say the building is not suitable or it is suitable. But it's not answering the question in terms of what the community needs are there. So those are the challenges. Industry trends and demands, I think this is a very important aspect, Chairperson, and it then relates to the strategic positioning of the Western Cape Legal Authority, and I think the ability for it to actually anticipate that. Understand the data that it holds, and then unpack that data in a way that they can plan proactively going forward. In this regard, I think the introduction then of a strategic leadership capacity is going to do much in that regard. So while I attempted in the past to be able to articulate that, the challenge in terms of implementation is you now have to be able to translate that message towards the people that work for you in a particular space and get them to understand that and do that. So I think that's where the things, with the support getting in there, where you have executive accountability for that implementation, we will see much more progress with that in the next year. Industry trends, of course, increasingly online. How do we respond to that? Despite the limitations of the Act, in terms of how we do that. And towards the end of last month, we had a workshop on this aspect in which we got everybody around the table to start understanding as well as to how do we positively respond it. So your legislation primarily should be enabling in this regard, and that should ultimately allow, I think by way of regulation rather, for the minister to respond to the challenges in terms of how business is conducted. But this points to a larger challenge, and I think that is dealt with and I have been invited, or it's been indicated that we will at the national level with all the national all the provincial liquor regulators and the national regulator to speak to the issue about business, ease of business, and the appropriate responses within the province, and possibly explore the way in which we deal with this going forward. So that essentially then is a particular response to that. Community reach and accessibility of the WC, again, a lot of that depends on communities being able to access our electronic system. A big development in this regard, however, is the walk-in center that will allow people simply to walk in and indicate, and they will be assisted in terms of our generating a profile, being able to access their specific files, and then being able to respond to that. Chairperson, then strategies to overcome the thing. So we have I did touch on this, Chairperson. So I mean, I can. It's basically, I spoke to the slide. So if you can see there, I said interrogate the trends as apparent from incidental data, facilitating stakeholder engagement with communities. We go to the next slide. I think the WCLA challenges. We have 2 vacancies right now, Chairperson, as you correctly pointed out, and in some instances it is difficult. It has been difficult to formulate a quorum in some instances. Fortunately, we can carry 2, provided everybody else is basically in attendance. The executive level of work necessitates greater operational involvement by the governing board. That is essentially what has been happening. The committees that are established then have to become much more involved, more so than you would normally expect from a governing board. Expertise in relation to ICT and the risk function, Chairperson, if I could just indicate that that's probably one of the areas within the board that we would benefit from appointment from. So ICT and the risk function. Only 1 CA remaining on the governing board, and we're very grateful for contribution to the board. But this is a second term, and very soon she would also be leaving. So we have to factor this in. You may recall that previously Mr. Kingwell was on the board as a CA. So we have always had a strong CA on the governing board. We cannot escape this, and going forward, I mean, we have 2 more years until the board basically rotates again, or shall I say, comes up for a total new board again, and a CA appointment within that mix will become critical. Right now, if should for any reason we not have the current, we will be seriously challenged in terms of that. Legal practitioners such as counsel, that is also needed, and I reflect that although we have legally trained people on the governing board, bear in mind that some of them have not been practicing for a very long time or practicing different things. We have 2 persons there. I am fortunately also legally trained, and as I said, ex officio on the board, so it is a strong thing. But what I liked, for instance, when I think about how previously we supported the board, the previous board chairperson still is an advocate. What's nice around it is his time is limited, so he's very focused in terms of the points. When you approach him around the legal aspects, he's able to give direct guidance in terms of that. He's also indicated. So the point I'm trying to make there, that the advantage, although we can safely say, if you had the choice, your ICT and risk would be the preference. If you understand where we are in terms of legal aspects, then I think a practitioner must be. So not just somebody that's legally required. There is a difference. You need somebody at the grind, right? Something like that. Then the same applies to a legal practitioner, I think. And then the community reach and accessibility of the WCM. That is a challenge. Strategy to counter the challenges there. As I've said, the committee is now tasked with making recommendations to the government. The executive level of work that has now been introduced as far as the OD exercise is concerned. Nominees with the requisite skills to be prioritized, which includes charting. I said that exactly right now. Thank you. Key partners to implement strategies. The one is the National Liquor Authority, Synergy as a collective. I think there's so much more that we can do in terms of working and liaising with the national structures. The one, for instance, is what highlighted us. There's vacuums that have been created based on the legislation that will be coming from provinces and how that legislation is currently framed. That gap in terms of what national regulator is responsible for. That is a vacuum, and this is where interpretive challenges are arising. So clearly there's a need for us to explore and compel and nudge national to take up that responsibility, to provide there. In the absence thereof, we essentially then need to ensure that how we go about in the province needs to be there. Of course, legislative review and amendments is the one way of doing it, but you still have a limitation as to how far you can go as far as that. The other key partners, of course, as I've alluded to, because they're legislators, SAPs, local government, the collaborative approaches and integrated operational planning in terms of prioritizing community partnership. This is where we must do much more, I think, going forward. Next then. Organizational design, I think there's an issue that has taken us quite a while to get to this point. We run at the 10% as far as our budget is concerned. We're accommodating a 10% vacancy rate, and that is simply because generally with normal attrition, you would be standing at 10% if people exit the organization, as international trends suggest. The staff complement currently in terms of the structure is 95, and we have 88 permanent positions. Of that, right now, and sorry, this is now off the top of my head, 66 individuals are in positions, and you have this vacancy. The vacancy, of course, was also carried to them simply because of the need for the WCLA to be able to implement the revised structure and to prioritize posts based on their impact, applying a 80-20 principle, so to speak. The uncompetitive nature of our salaries, that is a big thing. We're losing we're losing staff. The rotation of that is essentially very tight. The one I can cite as an example. So there is a DPSA directive that outlines the ideal finance structure, and it provides a structure we call a functional structure for finance within any entity or institution of government. We are unable to implement that to the full extent, and that is simply because if we do so, our budget will considerably have to be expanded. But within the context of the organization, its size, the current budget, it would not make sense to be doing that as far as salaries are concerned, and then and as far as regulatory impact is concerned. You can't prioritize it in that way. We can only do that once we actually convince the custodial department and I think provincial treasury for that to happen, which means if you're going to agree that we're compelled to do that, and we have challenges, I must say, those areas are the risk. We have appointed 2 people in the last 2 years in those positions. We have made 2 appointments since the last resignation. Both those appointments declined once the offer was made to them because they were trying to negotiate other salaries beyond that. And I think they used it, to be honest, to bargain where they were. I think that's the only conclusion we've come to. I've now resorted to getting contractors to fill the function on an interim basis. Staff turnaround times, I'm finance, I highlighted. Thank you, Chair. So the governing board role here, quite simply, it's none other than you would associate with many other governing. It's a governance. It has fiduciary oversight. It must look at the assets, act with integrity, and avoid conflict of interest. Chairperson, the list is obvious as it is stated there. Governance and compliance, transparent, all of that. And then, of course, the PFMA is directly responsible. As the CEO, I sit on the governing board ex officio. And then as such, I translate that accountability to the daily operations of the organization. We then also have a delegation of duties, a delegation of powers, which is then the charter for me to where I get my powers from in terms of to act on for and on behalf of the governing board. So in relation to that. But can I say the following in terms of the governing board? The governing board is directly responsible for a few appointments. One is the CEO. They appoint the CEO. The governing board appoints the presiding officer. And the governing board appoints the secretary of the liquor licensing tribunal. They also then process or facilitate the appointment of the LRT, which means the liquor licensing tribunal. So all those appointments are facilitated by the governing board. But in terms of almost like permanent to the structure or to the things, the secretary to the liquor licensing tribunal and the presiding officer and other deputy presiding officers are appointed by the governing board. And I think those are then they also, but the accounting to the governing board is then via me as a CEO and a member of the governing board. Those reports are tabled and are considered at the governing board. Chairperson, I think I've gone through most of them. Key projects that we have in line. So one is the legislative review. It's not our project. Essentially, it is a department project. The department, as the custodian of the Western Cape Liquor Authority, is also the custodian of the legislation for that. We have the walk-in center, which is key to our access, the access that we'd like to grant or create for applicants and for communities generally. We are on a concerted drive as far as innovation and automation is concerned, because we believe this will expedite the processes and respond to a number of our challenges. Of course, that in addition to some other interventions. And we have to review our policy considerations relating to HR and remuneration. Bear in mind that the Act provides that we must have an HR policy and we must have that policy must be signed off in conjunction with the custodial department and provincial treasury. So those are things, and very substantial to the performance of the Western. And this is why I accentuated this, is the situational analysis. The situational analysis suggests the methodology that the Western Cape Liquor Authority is following in terms of the public participation process. It is key to us to expedite that going forward. Chairperson, I believe that is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to open to members of the committee for any questions or comments. Member Kaiser Philander.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chair, I welcome the presentation. Thank you very much. Just as much of what I've gathered from the presentation itself in terms of the compliance when it comes to WCLA, I note the enforcement partners. I didn't hear much in terms of joint operations. I think that is something that perhaps could be elaborated more on, since we've mentioned the stakeholder partners being one of those municipalities as well. Chairperson, I also note, or I would assume in consideration, the broader role of local municipalities when it comes to zoning and land use. That brings me to my question. So in terms of intergovernmental coordination and the public interest mandate, which was made mention of, who holds the primary responsibility? We spoke a lot about business, but who holds the primary responsibility for the monitoring and enforcing compliance with liquor license conditions, especially in cases where shebeens operate in residential zones? And furthermore, how are municipalities currently classifying these areas for business purposes, and what are the mechanisms that are in place to reassess or to intervene where illegal or inappropriate trading persists? I don't think I have to go into much detail pertaining to the questions. We all know areas where this is a huge concern, and and obviously leads to other things within communities as well. So I would like to address and ask that be answered. Thank you, Chair.
I see a hand online, Member Glensu.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think I must also join Member Fernanda for welcoming the presentation. And I think you did frame it, Chair, well in respect to the rationale, for us to ask the Western Cape Liquor Authority Board to appear before the committee. And there are 2 points to make, given this, what was presented. In fact, I've been perusing this since I joined the committee, at the competence and the vision and the mission of the liquor board. An area of interest relate to the issue of the ICT, and indeed, globally we're moving digital, and there is an inevitable reality. And I think the official spoke in length about the centrality of the IT, and the point is made to say it is indeed a tool for efficient processing of applications. And the question then arises, to what extent is the rollout of the ICT processes, accommodating the working class, those operating in working class communities in this instance, who today, others are still operating ship-ins, but would like to be part of the formal mainstream operators, So what awareness have you rolled out, and to ensure that none whatsoever is excluded in the process on the basis of where one is located? This talk to those who live in the metro and those who live in the rural parts of the province, where still there is limited access to internet. That's the first point. The second point, which relates to the next item in the agenda. I'm not sure whether I heard it correctly, because one, you have the current board, you have those with expertise. Did I hear you correct when you say, in respect to expertise, the gap related to individuals or candidates with ICT expertise, in respect to legal background and so on, you are comfortable. Now, the gap is on the ICT. Did I get you correct? If I did not get you correct, if I did not get you correct, kindly elevate or highlight the existing gaps so that the 2 vacancies can be used to address such gaps. Thank you very much.
Right, then from my side, it might be, I'm just in terms of the purpose of this presentation, and colleagues, please ask other questions as well. I have no difficulty whatsoever if we ask questions about the Liquor Authority otherwise as well. We can get 2 birds with 1 stone, but I just, in terms of the original reason why we had you here, we are trying to distill areas according to which to assess potential vacancies here. So what I'm hearing is clear. You did a bit of a lobby there in your presentation. Nothing wrong with it. You're doing it transparently as well. So we're looking at CA/legal expertise, specialized expertise. There seems to be a need for broader industry knowledge as well, a deep understanding of the social issues that's associated and social impact, stakeholder management, right from call it industry stakeholders to community stakeholders, so that ability to understand and manage that. Clearly, we want somebody with ethics and competence. That more or less sounds to me like that's just a comment that I would like to hear a response to. And then if I can also then go into some more general comments. If I look at, I'm seeing a structure and organization that is strong on compliance, which is good. You know, we comply with the law in the Western Cape, and it's a value, and it's important. At the same time, we want to also create change and facilitate progress. So if you need to have both. Now I don't know the Liquor Authority well enough to draw or make firm conclusions in my mind, but certainly when we talk of ICT, for example, and streamlining processes there, there's a picture in my mind how it can work and liaise with law enforcement as well. If you can tell us more of what that means, and I'll give you an example. Does that mean it fast tracks your existing compliance processes? Or alternatively, is there a platform where information is not only fast tracking your processes, but immediately available to law enforcement and the police? Maybe I should. This is now entirely for the purposes of making my point, but I do not think it's difficult to create a system where you have a geocoded map, where you can geocode exactly what liquor licenses of what nature is available. You mentioned earlier the George area, that you can, a police officer or a law enforcement officer or anyone from the Liquor Authority, open their phone, go on their phone, and they can see exactly in that area where are the legal outlets, what liquor licenses they have, what it really shouldn't be difficult. I've seen that kind of thing. That's something that is transversal in nature, you know. So that's sort of a picture in my mind. I'm not pitching that. I'm saying it purely in the interest that you understand my question. And then secondly, to what extent, now we don't want irresponsible, illegal liquor outlets. At the same time, we want to foster industry and access to the industry. You know, now I can imagine if you look at the high street, well, there's a description in terms of people dealing, for example, with the township economy, the high street concept, where you have economic drivers. We have responsible legal businesses. You create a formal legal economy that lifts up and transforms the community around it. To what extent is there a cohesive strategy, or alternatively, to what extent do you fit into a cohesive strategy in that regard? So these are fairly broad questions, but see it as me exploring the thinking here. So over to you. So sorry, my apologies. Member Boyson also had his hand up, and I see Member Jacobs has also joined us. So Member Boyson and then Member Jacobs.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I'm actually afraid that the answer to my question might encourage what we don't want in society, but I'm going to ask this because it's the reality where we live. As laymen and community members, for us, an illegal outlet is an outlet without a license. And when we suspect that, we give a call to SAPS and say there's some disturbances in the street, there's an illegal outlet and whatever. And at times we find that SAPS would arrive, and with the engagement with the property owner, etc., you know, and when we make a follow-up, you know, SAP's answer would be they're entitled to have those volumes. An individual is entitled to certain volumes on his property, you know, and the fear is, you know, when with such an answer, you know, it by word of mouth, that everybody can do it. You need certain volumes, and you are allowed to have certain volumes on your property. But the reality is these outlets multiplies because of an answer saying somebody that you can have 5 cases on your property. And when SEP comes, it's somebody's birthday or whatever, but we know it's not somebody's birthday. You know, so for how long can you have birthdays per month? You know, so that is the things that we are faced with in our communities. And we don't know when and where are the line drawn. And then my second question, Chairperson, is a legal practitioner on the board. Is that for defense when the board has been challenged, or is that for amendments to current laws or the act, etc.? Or is it, you know, like to have a legal mind, like operating as a lawyer advocate for the board? Thank you, Chair.
Member Jacobs. I see Member Van Minnen's hand has also got up.
Thank
Member
you, Chair.
Jacobs.
Thank you. Greetings to all. Can I go, Chair?
Yep. Please
May I go,
proceed.
Chairman?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
hear you.
Oh, thanks. Okay, Chair. So I've got a couple of questions that I would just like to ask. The first one that I want to ask is, with regards to the regulations, no? When it comes to our liquor traders, some of them have permits that would say that they can trade from 6 to 8. But then you find when the city gets there, those people get fined because the city then have something that say that you can only trade from 6 o'clock. So with that, I want to know, or is it the liquor board? Because the liquor board will give something that says you can trade from that or that. The city will come and say there's a bylaw. Now, remember, these people, they get heavy fines, right? Now, if you're trading overtime and you're not supposed to, then it's fine. Then you can get a fine if you don't comply. But we can't allow these things to happen when the liquor board gives you something to say you can trade till that time, the city comes. So there needs to be some sort of agreement between the liquor board and between the city of Cape Town. Then the other thing is also this, when it comes to the outlets, the city says that you can't turn your entire house into a liquor store. You can only use a part of it. Say, for instance, you use your garage, or there's a plan that you have turned the room into, you know, an outlet. But the city is not going to rezone your property. I haven't seen any property here in our areas being rezoned. Not even. The problem is land use. They don't come out now to distress. They just don't really have anything to say that they are allowed to trade from the city of Cape Town side, right? So with regards to that, how does it work? Is there something from the liquor board where they go out and check to see is your whole house? Because here by us, most of these people have turned their houses entirely into liquor stores. They don't even stay here anymore. They're the big babas now. And they are responsible for all this illegal trading after hours. It's massive here by us. They're driving around with their trucks and their bakkies at night on a Sunday. What did the liquor board put in place to make sure that they police over these kind of things? So yeah, that is basically what I wanted to know with regards to the liquor board, you know, in terms of that. Thank you.
Member Van Minnen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mine are more of a technical nature, my questions. The vacancies, we know that vacancies can bedevil departments and organizations. So I just want to know what the patterns have been with the vacancy reports. How long has this been a problem? Is it currently higher than it has been in the past, or is it lower than it has been in the past? And we've also heard about non-competitive salaries. What is being done in this space to ensure that salaries are competitive? And we can just discuss the model. It would also be useful to actually see an organogram of the situation. But if we could please just cover that for now. Thank you.
Right, over to the Liquor Authority.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, members. I will attempt to respond to all those questions to the best of my ability. If I could start immediately with the last question by Member Van Mullen. In relation to the structure, I think what is important to understand that over the last 3 years, I think the issue around the Western Cape Liquor Authority is not unique. I think generally within the public service, there's been an attempt to optimize resources, and one of the ways in which that has been done was to look at the current, to like basically guard vigilantly expenditure in relation to personnel. I think that is across the board and throughout the province, but also throughout the country. As far as the structure of the Western Cape Liquor Authority is concerned, there has been no formal organizational design process implemented since the detachment of the Western Cape Liquor Authority. Now, if you just have to apply within a historical context, you had what was then called, within DDAT, what was then called a liquor board, and it evolved, and you had the legislation, and then you have the detachment of that. There was a detachment with a few positions created, but by and large, you didn't have a structure for the support services. At that point in time, it was thought that DDAT would assist with the Western Cape Liquor Authority with exactly that. In 2015, attempt was made to get can I say the following? First, it was then committed by the DDAT at that point in time that they would do a formal structural design process for the Western Cape Liquor Authority within the year. That unfortunately never materialized, which meant that the ad hoc nature of the growth of the Western Cape Liquor Authority was then required in terms of compliance. So what you would have had is you had to have a CFO. And then the CFO position was created. So what you found in terms of the development and the growth of the WCLA historically has been a reaction to what, from a compliance perspective. So you had to have a risk officer. You had to, then all of a sudden we would add all of that. It was not, the structure was not responsive to a strategy of regulation. Maybe that is maybe. So you can understand that we would always have been a challenge for us in terms of that exercise. Then the exercise was embarked upon. A report was, there were two challenges. One, the process of that identifying that service provider was challenging and found to be irregular. That was the thing. But the report cannot actually be faulted that was subsequently submitted. It was by and large a feasible report. OD within government found it acceptable in terms of the methodology it followed and agreed to certain things, proviso with two provisos. One, the levels, they needed to be confirmed, the levels of the positions. And the other one was in relation to the number of the positions. So you can understand they reserved, they're okay with the methodology, okay with the groups of working and so on. The determination of the levels and the determination of the number of staff, that was an issue. So the budget requirements for that was excessive when they tabled it with provincial government, and it went nowhere, basically. It was something like, the first phase, something like 30 million. Ultimately, if you accepted the Rolls-Royce, it was going to about 70 or 80 million. It was not feasible at that point in time. The last exercise, however, when the last governing board decided that we can't go on in this manner, and I took up the position there and I facilitated, I think, then the new OD structure. But undertaking very clear, we were going to accommodate any developments going forward within the budget and gradually expand the budget to be able to do so. We've come to the point now that the organizational structure report was accepted by the WCLA, and I'll provide the committee with a copy of the existing and the one that is in the report. Bearing in mind that the report one is where we're moving towards, but not fully implemented. The only aspect of the report that will be implemented right now, chairperson and members, would be the one that relates to that executive level of work. That for now is the only. It's the only one we can really afford as well at this given point in time. But I trust that now demonstrates the issue at hand. If I can go to the member Jacobs, and if I understand correctly, the issue here in relation to fines that are imposed and the hours that are given. So what normally happens, and again, I mean, I'm going by what was the things. There may be a tweaking of the response by my officials, but by and large, the conditions imposed as far as hours would be relating to the commercial or business hours of the municipality concerned. In fact, what has happened and what they are able to do, I'm talking about the applicants that are now have been granted license holders. The license holders can approach local government for an extension of those hours. That's essentially what then happens. So if this has happened, I would really like to know where it has happened in relation to hours imposed by the Western Cape Liquor Authority, the LLT, sorry, and then those being reduced by local government. I think that will be an interesting incident if we come across that. The other more pertinent issue, which is a prevailing one, is the issue around zoning. Zoning is basically the single obstruction in relation to licensing within areas where you do not have a commercial presence, greater commercial presence, where you do not have zoning for commercial or business happening. So what is very problematic, especially around that, is that invariably when you file licenses in those areas, the legit licenses, and by this I need to say it because a license is granted by us. The only leverage we have as the Western Cape Liquor Authority, and more specifically the LLT, is over a license, not somebody that doesn't have a license. And I think this is it's such a difficult thing to explain because people can't relate to us being helpless as far as the illegals are concerned, the illegal operators are concerned. There we rely heavily on what the South African Police Services do, because that is a transgression basically in terms of regulation generally. What we can do is make them aware that illegal trading is happening in this. What we further are inclined to do now from an operational perspective is trying to identify who enables the illegal trading, which means if you have liquor to sell, you probably bought that liquor from somebody who is allowed to trade liquor. So increasingly, that is where our focus is going. So last year we appointed, within the inspectorate, bear in mind now inspectorate would be very much law enforcement orientated. They would come from that space and that environment. However, understanding now what requires of legislation, we're increasingly moving to the need to interrogate data, especially financial data, which is allowed for in the Act, but also expanding that to other categories of license. Right now, in terms of consumption, we are able to request information or data that demonstrate the number of the liquors and the volumes of liquor distributed and dispensed. That's what we can do in those instances. We then monitor the amount of liquor being sold, because there is something that in our legislation that limits it to 140. But granted, if you scrutinize the books and you see volumes of 140, 149, then immediately, from a data perspective, that is suspicious. So then your operations need to try and identify who are these individuals that are buying on an individual basis this volumes of what's in it. Now, as you've indicated, and I'm not sure what was meant, that these are parties, and the argument is they are conducting parties. And unfortunately, those things can only be counted by direct evidence, which means you have to catch them in act in terms of selling it, somebody buying it. So it's a very specific form of operations. And that kind of operations would normally be a joint operation between other law enforcement in the area. So it is a particular challenge, and we accept that. As far as zoning is concerned, coming back to the requirement of zoning. So we have gone to lengths to try and process as much as we can until the LLT is then able to say, yes, and you can grant this license provided you have zoning. The net result of that is invariably, if you don't get you won't be. So we have to now basically insist that going forward, listen, if you're going to take up this kind of space in the LLT, then we have to be relatively sure that you're going to get a, you know, that kind of zoning for the area. As far as zoning in residential areas, it's a near impossibility, and it's unlikely it will happen. So the challenge to economy within resident is that those areas are by and large residential areas, and for them to be getting those zoning, it would be a considerable effort, and also it's a very expensive exercise to get that. But we cannot, unfortunately, escape that. So when people are operating illegally as an outlet, the first remedy or call is, as you've indicated, is the South African Police Services. When the investigation is of a technical nature, of course we will collaborate with that, and we would have sting operations from a compliance perspective, and that is what we Member Boyson is one of the ways in which we respond to that. Coming back to the question by the chairperson, in terms of ICT and then moving away from that. Yeah, I now take the time and the opportunity to elaborate on that as well. So in terms of optimization of our existing resources, and some elsewhere, and I'm thinking I did mention it, but I'm compiling so many documents at this point in the financial year that I seem to forget where exactly that is. But in terms of this aspect, we do understand that our entire operations must be to that. So what where we want to get to is that we would have on record, even for the LLT when they sit as a structure, their access to data held by the organization should be able to do it on their laptops. The other thing around it is interaction between ourselves and the DLO should be instant, meaning that if we enter something on the file, they would have access to that information immediately. That is where we want to be. We have the base of that system in place. Bringing everybody on board, and the only challenge I now have is being able to bring other institutions such as SAPS and developing a mechanism for them to access all their licenses in their particular areas. And that's how we want it. So there they can work on it, they can upload things, the complaints aspects, all of those things can be dealt with. The same with local government. So there's no paper that we want to be pushing. Actually, there will just be pop-ups in relation to a license application process and then immediate responses. What is beneficial of that, chairperson, is that you can monitor the progress and development by way of further pop-ups to the management. So you'd have control of the length of time it takes, the return time, or all of that. Right now, that is gaining momentum because we have an ICT champion on board for that. So I think the important we want to say just around that is that is key to us making it possible for not only ourselves, but also all the other key partners in being able to access the process. I think there was an aspect around, isn't the development of ICT and the way we are applying it in this automation, moving away from the base, meaning the people that most need the access, essentially, they do not have the technical know-how or the resources in terms of devices to be able to utilize that service. I think that is a very important comment. In part, that is addressed with the development of the walk-in center. Now, why we deem the walk-in center critical, now bear in mind, yes, we understand that will be beneficial to the Greater Cape Town area, and there's a limitation to that. However, this does not limit the possibility of us going to the centers of provincial government where they reach out to deliver the services. But that would be on the basis that we actually then scheduled periods within particular weeks at particular to go to particular centers. Which was the model that I'm thinking of is, if you recall way back, we had the Tucson mobile projects, whereby as government, as a provincial government, we provide all the services in a given space. That is one of the tools we will be utilizing in this regard. But the other one that is immediately available is that we do have our inspectors going out on a constant basis to these areas getting them then to facilitate it whilst they're in that area, should we have any inquiry to us for assistance in that regard. We can then build up a database that says, listen, in this area, we've received these requests for assistance. And then when our staff goes to that area, they will make contact and do that and then effective. But I think the caution is understood that we do not move away from actually being beneficial to all the people of the residents of the Western Cape, and not only those that are technically savvy. The walk-in center hopes to respond to that, which is by and large an area where 50% of all license applications are submitted. And then the other one would be in relation to the remote areas, is actually arranging slots either with our inspectorate, alternatively going out there at defined times together with all the other services of government. The issue about the high street model, maybe I think it was mentioned within the context. I think previously we had the game changers within the province. I think then the then Premier Zille wanted to expedite licenses within certain areas in the Western Cape, and the high street model was one of the considered. I can say that even the Premier then battled to convince municipalities to revisit their zoning in a way that would have made that possible. We were not able to, I can't recall that, I must add, sorry, it may be one or two chairperson, but I can't recall any of those taking off or actually being granted subsequently in terms of them. But I stand corrected, I must say. I was not with the organization then, but I'm thinking back of that time. Chairperson, I'm not sure if I covered all the questions you've highlighted, but I think because the question was the availability of ICT to enable operations. I think that was the aspect that I got from your question. And then access to the industry generally. How do people gain access to their files? So what we're looking at is shaking some of the logistical aspects that are currently. So now you'll have the LLT making some decision. It goes to an administration that now must process that request. Now, if it's manual, with the applicant. And in our engagement with the industry, I mean, that's and the increased perception that what value is there from the administration. The thought process now is that if the LLT makes a decision and they articulate that way, whoever's file that relates to, that individual should be able to access the data immediately. So the instruction doesn't have to go to somebody else in terms of that. If you have your options, but this is relatively new, the discussions are ongoing in the organization, and that's where we'd like to end up, Chairperson. Then if I can come to Member for Landers, in terms of joint operations, yes, certainly. So key to some of the aspects, as I've noted now, in terms of some of the illegal operations, we cannot function in that space, as you know, because the docket must be carried by the agency, the law enforcement agency. What we do is look for evidence that speaks to who provides and enables those licenses. We also identify them to engage SAPs with them, and we write formally to SAPs in relation to those outlets. Again, zoning and land use, as I've indicated in my response in terms of other question, it is something absolutely within the realm of local government, and it's probably one of the most challenging. I think the question was asked, so who looks at this from the governmental perspective? Certainly our wish is that DDAT takes up that. Because remember, it's about business and opportunities in the business space. So what is hindering business in those specific areas? And I think what makes those communities even more angry is that when they see commercial development in the space, the commercial developer would have a number of businesses on that commercial property. So there's no zoning challenges there, because before they embark on building that structure, they would make sure that business rights and all of these are taken. So in that structure, you would then have a license request. What the community see is they can't get license per year, license goes up, and license premises goes up. So it is a very challenging aspect for it. So intergovernmental relations, Chairperson and members, is a key aspect of this. We do not, I think, appreciate that if a consideration of ours is a key aspect or element of the LLT, in deciding whether a license can be granted or not. So if you have objectors saying, but listen, no, this license is going to make a considerable noise. And then the LLT then says, okay, this premises can only operate till 12 o'clock. Will that address your concerns? Or they feel that will address the concerns of the objectors. Then you'd find the hours is introduced. However, that individual can now go to local government and request an extension. So intergovernmental relations, we must ensure that we do not frustrate our respective mandates. As far as entities and institutions of governments are concerned. Then in relation to complaints, I think there's a need for us. Bear in mind that if you look at the risk matrix that we are developing in relation to areas, the risk matrix will emanate or be contained within the situational analysis for that area. If that becomes apparent, the situational analysis must demonstrate where are we finding illegal trade happening in that. Where do we suspect most of this is originating from? The operations then will stem from that. So you will have an operational plan that we'd like to generate based on what the situational analysis said in terms of crime stats and the liquor and trauma, all of those aspects. And in that process, with that matrix and with that situational analysis, the operations are geared towards that specifically. Those plans are intergovernmental, interagency, based on the nature of the aspect, nature of the particular challenge. Especially when it comes to after hours. Bear in mind, our staff, as far as a compliance aspect, they are not trained from a typical law enforcement perspective. They are trained from what would almost like a labor inspector. We don't encourage firearms. We won't be using any of those things. But once you go into territories that are very challenging, you cannot operate without those agencies. Chairperson, I'm hoping I covered most aspects. Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm going to do a round of follow-up questions. If you can keep your responses brief as well. I always try to ask our members to be as brief as possible, but equally applies to the officials that appear in front of us. But colleagues, I'm going to allow another round of questions, just of a more general nature, because I think it is useful for us to get a feel for the Liquor Authority. But then I'm going to bring the meeting to the purpose of this presentation, and that is to apply our minds to filling the vacancies. So I'm going to allow another round of follow-up questions in case you didn't get your answer. Then after that, we're going to be having our own discussion there. So yes, another round. Any other follow-up questions to the Liquor Authority? Member Kaiser Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. George, for the response. I think that was quite comprehensive, and I am satisfied to an extent. I think Section 675 of the Act speaks to the powers of inspection and enforcement, stating that liquor inspectors and SAPS officers are empowered to enter premises, seize evidence, and shut down illegal outlets. Now, in my previous address, I said I don't want to go into the detail of the consequences of illegal trade, but it's very evident that it is linked to crime, sir.
Yeah.
To violence, to underage drinking, and to social harm. And hence, Chairperson, I do apologize for hammering on that, because from what I hear, there is some extent of disconnect when it comes to who is responsible for what and the collaboration thereof. That is what I hear. And the law is very clear in terms of the prohibition and the sale of liquor without a license. So I would want to know, Chairperson, what specific measures are being taken? And now I'm speaking about the collaborative approach between SAPS, the WCLA, to collaborate with local municipalities in identifying, shutting down, and preventing the re-emergence of illegal shebeens in our communities. There should be some sort of collaborative approach. I mean, we hear this, the Act speaks about inspectors. So which means those are people that are there. Your municipalities has got dedicated officials dealing with business licenses itself, but also looking to the aspect of where are these traders located? Are the business licenses, first of all, are they approved by the municipality? But also from the police side, there's also dedicated officials. So it's not as if we speak within the broader sense of everything. It seems that each entity has got their dedicated officials. Hence, they should speak to each other in terms of curbing and looking at these specific instances and having to deal with those. And that's not what we necessarily see within our communities. If I could perhaps just have more sense into that, Chairperson. Thank you.
I just want to check any questions online. Mr. Matthews,
Yes, Chair.
first.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, Member Jacobs.
Yeah. Yes, Chair. With regards to the question that I was asked with of how the liquor traders is using their whole houses and all of that stuff and the illegal trading, I just wanted to check. So in our communities, a lot of our people, they are not so educated. They see things, but they don't know who to complain. They don't trust the police. So the liquor authority also don't take responsibility there, where they have some sort of a booklet or something that they can bring out to say, you know, when you see this, this is who you contact, this is what you do. Because remember, people can go to the police, but we know the police are corrupt. Let's say it the way it is. Why don't the liquor authority also take some responsibility to say, what? Here's the number, people can contact us. This is what we'll do. And take the licenses back of these people that don't comply. Because I don't really see harsh restrictions for them. You see people do things, but tomorrow that liquor store is open again. If the wine get taken now, tomorrow the police bring it back themselves. So is there something that they can put in place, like a booklet or something that can go out and educate people around these kind of things? Thank you.
Then just a very specific question from my side. You refer here in your presentation to a legislative review. So presumably, you know, it's a new legislation, amended legislation further down the line. If you can just give us feedback there in terms of what what's anticipated there, and particularly for this committee, what deadlines, what time periods we're looking at, because I think we would love to get into the legislation, this committee as well.
Okay. Chairperson, no, thank you for that. I understand I have three areas covered. If I can immediately respond to yours, and somehow my brain works that way, Chairperson. So as far as the legislative review is concerned, as I've indicated, it is a process driven by the department in conjunction with the Department of the Premier, more specifically the the legal services aspects of that. We, as a very keen interest, we have a very keen interest in that many of those amendments are suggested by us. Now, about 5 years ago, we embarked on a process whereby a review was undertaken and certain proposals were made. It was then discovered that if you look at the totality of the amendments that were considered, there were a few that would be what we would call the quick wins, or the quick ones. And then there were others that were more policy driven in terms of understanding that you had to have a better, almost like initial research in terms of the impact of that. That's often now recalled as the RIA. So the RIA process, then regulatory impact assessment process, what that then requires, that we had to motivate and justify the need for legislative review. There was an outline of a number of those. Most of those spoke to quick wins pertaining to what is currently maybe disenabling as far as the legislation is concerned. There's a number of aspects around that. It's the appointment of another appeal tribunal. That is the example. It is being able to give one of the what we call the Section 24 committees greater powers that you can also deal, because right now they can't deal with non-compliance, so we give them that as well. So when they sit and when we were looking for capacity, they can then do that as well. Then the need to advertise basically in the newspapers, which doesn't produce any results, that you'd rather have an engagement.
We understand the process. My question was actually quite simple, and I also understand, you know, that it comes via the department. Just from your perspective,
where we are,
when is it? When
so I'll request
specifically?
the department has now given it will. Okay. I'm made to understand it will be here at Parliament by November or something. Thank you. Is that okay?
That's fine. You can give attention to the other members' question.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Then and then the issue around. I think the complaints, I think, can I just say that we've identified that you have complaints around trading generally, whether it's legal or illegal, you'd find complaints in a given area. You would most of those relating to licensed premises would come to us. However, in relation to generally illegal, that will go to SAPS. I think the important thing is to develop a register across all the parties that we make sure that all complaints are basically come to the notice of the Western Cape Liquor Authority. And I think that is one of our challenges right now. We don't have all these complaints being centralized in terms of that. If they are centralized, I think I can then touch on the question by Member Philander, is that it will demonstrate that we have a problem and a challenge as a collective, and as such we must have a collective response to that. So that then would deal with us compelling our operational planning with the localized law enforcement agencies. We are committed to that, and we are keen on seeing that develop. We also had indicators of our performance that speaks to collaborative approaches around our implementation of our operations. And then I think a very valuable comment made is essentially how do we communicate with people so that they understand how to, and again, it's around how do they and who do they complain to? And I think it's very important that all the complaints come to our notice, because then we have an assessment of what the challenge is in that particular area. Because if people feel helpless and nothing will come of it and you don't get the complaint, they actually, we can't respond to it. So it's very important that we have a centralized depository as far as those are concerned. Chairperson, I hope I covered very briefly. Thank you.
Colleagues, we are, I think we need to get to the real item on the agenda, and that is to apply our minds to the vacancies. I have to say there's a lot of questions that arose. I'm sure, in fact, I'm 100% sure there's going to be a further engagement with you, particularly around, and I don't want to speak on behalf of all the committees. I think we will need to have our own discussion when we get to actions and resolutions on the agenda. But there's definitely a discussion in terms of transversality between the local government, urban planning, building control, the liquor authority, the SAPS, what systems underpin that. So we will be inviting, I'm pretty sure we're going to be inviting you back soon to explore, and the department as well. It does sound like it's a field that, I think a lot of things can be streamlined. I'm sure you will agree as well. But thank you very much for your presentation here. And we appreciate the time. We will be engaging with you in the future, and we are releasing you.
Comment, I would appreciate it. Also, if we do that invite, maybe that we can consider it in collaboration with SAPS, because it will be very useful to them. Thank you.
Yeah, there's an interesting, given our other discussions in the committee, there's an interesting line of discussion that started, which I think we need to not lose. Thank you very much. Colleagues, there are refreshments outside. I suggest we take make it a 5-minute break just to get our coffee ready, and also for the people online to go and stretch your legs and make a cup of coffee for yourself.
Thank you, Chair.
Colleagues, so we are reopening the meeting. We are currently under actions and resolutions based on, and this I would suggest, colleagues, it's of a more generic nature. I would like to suggest that we have a work into our content-based oversight, an engagement regarding what the problems are in the current liquor legislations, particularly pertaining to promoting job creation, but also at the same time managing the social ills associated with particularly the liquor related problems in the Western Cape. But I think we should have, there's two things here. On the one hand, there's legitimate business, legitimate job creation. At the same time, it must not be a drive of social ills. It must be a solution to social ills, the way we approach it. But I would suggest that we have a discussion and perhaps invite some experts to come and address us, give us a fresh perspective on this. So colleagues, that's my suggestion. Any other suggestions? Member van Minnen.
Thanks very much. And look, I think, and this group in particular, we have done enough oversight of hospitals and health facilities to know, and I don't say this entirely jocularly, when it comes to job creation, the bad effects of liquor create a lot of job creation in the Western Cape when it comes to emergency services, hospitals, nurses, doctors. We have seen the enormous social ills that are visited on emergency centres over weekends on payday from the whole issue of alcohol. But, and I think this is the really important issue we have to remember, most of it does not emanate from the legal provision of liquor. It comes from either the irresponsible use of the product or from illegal outlets. And legal outlets, we have this entire framework of regulation. And I think that it is probably regulated pretty well. People will always have opinions, but in general, the legal side is regulated very well. The problem is the illegal side. And as we have heard this morning, there is very little input the Liquor Authority has there. It is more an enforcement issue. It is a policing issue. And also it is a social responsibility issue, with neighborhoods that are plagued by these problems actually speaking up and actually speaking to the police and giving evidence. So it's an enforcement problem that we're facing. We have to keep the two streams separate in what we do going forward. And I think we need to bear that in mind. So part of this process must also be engagements with policing organizations, policing services, to ensure that what we're going to see out there on the streets is actual proper enforcement, proper gathering of evidence, proper prosecution. And that lies outside the ambit of the Liquor Board. Thank you.
Colleagues, any other suggestions?
My hand is up, Chair. Yeah. No, thanks, Chair. I want to build on the point made by Member van Minnen, you know, and that, but come with a different angle. To advance an argument that, as you made a point about how liquor overwhelm hospitals across the province, you know. I think for me, that has to do largely with chronic underdevelopment, and largely they occur in squatter camps, you know. So indeed, there are things which are beyond the committee. As long as the chronic crisis of underdevelopment is not addressed, they're going to be, I mean, we are going to face a number of unlicensed liquor outlets in the province. And those liquor outlets are not found in Bishop's Court, in Bregenfeld, but they are found in Khayelitsha, in Bishop Levis, amongst other things. So, yes, I think as the point has been, the legal authority should continue with their own pleas and some endeavors. For instance, I took them to Atlantis, to engage with the unlicensed liquor operators so that they can have an appreciation of the impact of operating unlicensed, not according to rules, and also to be made, also to understand the processes for them to move towards being licensed. So I think we need to engage also with other committees and say, how should we respond to this as an oversight body in this instance? Otherwise the report for me was quite fine, but of course it has some gaps, and such gaps are beyond their control in this instance. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, Member Boyson.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, just to add what Member Ngentu have now just raised with the other committees, a crucial standing committee for me would probably be the Committee of Infrastructure. In the sense, I don't know how to put it, but when local municipalities submit their development plans for human settlements, probably to have a rider for those municipalities to ensure that there are dedicated zones for these kind of operations, because currently it happens even street by street, and that has an effect, like on the peace within the communities itself. If there can be dedicated, like you have an industrial area, and those outlets should be based in such areas, just as an example. Thank you.
Just want to check any other hands online. Member Jacobs.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think Member Boyson has touched on that, because you see, Chair, what's happening when you look at the location and you look at the different areas. It's kind of like a bit different from our areas. So you find sometimes also we must bring the liquor board also in at some point, how they do things. Because, say, for instance, here by me, our streets, it's in a crescent. So you find here's one crescent. In one crescent, they give 2 licenses. What happens is, I think they should be more careful in terms of when they give the licenses, to who they give the licenses, do a little bit of research, background check, instead of just checking for compliance. Because most of the times you'll find it, so there's an ordinary person opening up a liquor store and he's making business, and the gangs are taxing. Now the gang boss opens a liquor store himself, but not him, maybe his sister or his brother. And they also get a liquor license in that very same street. And then you find, the other one gets shot at. That happened twice already by us. So at some point in time, Chair, we must also bring the liquor board under fire in terms of how they are doing things. I can speak out now and say I know a lot of people that's working for the liquor board that's alerting people to say, hey, they're gonna come for you, It's happening here in our areas. I'm saying there's certain, they must come up with something, because there's a lot of people that they don't know who to speak to. So there it's available, you can speak to that, there. That's what must happen. Don't just listen to what the liquor board are saying. There's a lot of things they're doing that is not right. Thank you, Chair.
Member Kaiser Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm covered in terms of the point that was raised in terms of other issues, given the overall impact, as well as the infrastructure one as well, and standing committee on local government. Chair, I think the pertinent mention was also made in terms of zoning. And I think we all know the cumbersome process relating to that. Businesses sometimes just open, whether it's a street away from a church or a street away from a creche, just goes ahead because of that process when it comes to zoning. So you, Chairperson, the procedural officer, must perhaps just guide in terms of who will we invite or speak to that specific process. as I think the responsibility lies with the local authority. But I think that incorporates with the entire perspective that we want to have on this issue. Thanks, Chair.
Colleagues, so it sounds like there's support for the idea that we create as part of our content-based oversight in the committee that we further explore both the economic opportunities as well as the social risks associated with, call it the current liquor licensing regime or system, and that we should, what I specifically also said, that we also speak to outside views, get fresh views in on this. My impression was, I don't think we got a fairly bureaucratic answer. I don't blame the people involved. That's, you know, they work for a particular authority, but I think we need to also have a bit of a bird's eye view on the problems associated with the topic there. And colleagues, and then what I suggest is we bring it up as part of our oversight and we give it further content in future discussion. But it sounds to me like the committee is all, the committee members are all more or less on the same page. This is actually something that where the solutions certainly to us seem fairly straightforward, but pulling it all together and making it sure that it happens transversely across departments and across different tiers of government, that seems to be the real challenge. But before I preempt that discussion, it sounds like we have an agreement. Procedural Office, you've picked, you captured that. Colleagues, then if we can get to the discussion on the shortlisting of the Western Cape Liquor Authority Governing Board vacancies. So what we have is we got background now. We have a sense of the kind of challenges there are. We have many questions that were raised in our own minds during the course of the presentation. But just in terms of filling those vacancies, I've made notes in terms of what we should be looking at. We also need to look at our program as the committee when we want to do these interviews. We'll get to exactly what the process should be. But let me just read the liquor board, the relevant chapter in the Act. There's hereby established an independent juristic person to be known as the Western Cape Liquor Board. The board has the right and capacity to conduct and participate in legal proceedings and conduct all its business in its own name. I won't go into every single word. Is it also possible to send this to members as well before we get to the next step of our process? But the board consists out of 6 members who should have appropriate knowledge or experience in systems and processes for ensuring proper accountability, probity and openness in the conduct of the business of an organization. And then 1 member that has appropriate knowledge or experience in dealing with the combating of negative social consequences of the abuse of liquor. So it's essentially, it's people that understand systems and can manage systems, have expertise there with a specific individual that must be expert on the social consequences. So there's the first thing that we need to highlight. Is there a gap in terms that we should be looking at in terms, is there currently somebody that is fulfilling that particular function? Or is that part of what we should be looking at? And well, there was a public participation process, and then the Standing Committee must make the recommendation referred to in subsection 1 after evaluating all candidates as to the suitability for appointment. But we must also keep race and gender sensitivity in mind. And the minister then essentially takes over the rest of the process from here. So I just want to check with the procedural officer. Essentially, we are coming up with a short list. We need to take the requirements. Essentially, we have to look at whether expertise is covered and whether there is a gap in terms of the social impact component of it. and we need to have, according to this, we must display race and gender sensitivity around this. But essentially, apart from that, it's our process of shortlisting that we come up with ourselves. I just want to confirm whether my understanding is correct.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's shortlisting from the long list submitted by the department, by the minister. The long list is 3, so based on the information that was sent to us. So it's 2 out of 3 candidates that must be.
Okay, so
but the committee can, if it sees so fit, submit all 3 candidates because the minister must appoint from the shortlist.
Colleagues, I'm in your hands. It sounds like we will only need a meeting. You know, if we take the route of, well, I believe we should take the route of interviewing people, but it can be covered in one committee meeting time-wise, so it's not a particularly strenuous process. It sounds, and I would also suggest that we take the approach, I'm going to plagiarize entirely what Member Van Minnen did recently in her committee. We identified the things that are basic compliance. You know, in other words, we need to comply with the Act there. We need to look at whether there's a gap in terms of the person dealing with an expert on the social consequences of abuse of alcohol. We need to look at the kind of expertise we need, and obviously we need to keep race and gender sensitivity in mind. It is in the Act. And then what we also need to do is have a set of questions from the committee itself over and above the, call it pro forma statutory compliance type of questions. And I would suggest, again, using what was done in a Member Van Minnen's committee, which I thought worked very well. We identify a set of categories with a question out of each one of those categories that we ask individuals. We ask them to do a presentation, and we ask them questions out of each one of those categories, and we score people. And then we compare our notes. Then that ranked list, we can then use as the short list to send to the minister. Does that make sense? I just need to keep an eye on the online side as well.
In agreement.
Chairperson, I am happy with your proposal. Support.
So that seems like we agreed there. Then I would like to, this is purely my own notes that I took now, so I would like to hear what you think about this. There are a couple of categories that we need to be looking at. As I said right up front, there's what emanates from the Act. I might not personally like everything in that particular Act, but the fact is it's what we need to use to apply it. So we need to look at the general expertise. We need to look at whether the social understanding of social impact is understood. We need to look at the race and gender sensitivity aspect of it. We will. That's the first sort of, call it, statutory aspects we need to look at, where we need to apply a judgment. What I picked up in the presentation, then this is why I suggest the committee has its own questions. One is we need somebody with financial / relevant legal expertise, right? So, sort of specialized expertise. That's one category we should be assessing. I would also suggest we have a second category where we look at, and it's more than a CA, whether somebody has experience in the industry itself, understanding the industry, understanding, frankly, the ins and outs of the liquor industry, right? I'm not saying it needs to be somebody from the industry per se, but somebody that understands it. That's one category. I would also suggest a deep understanding of the social issues that's around that impacts or that the effects of alcohol abuse. I would also suggest we look at management, systems management, people who understand systems, transversal systems, the ability to Yeah, well, I'm going to be frank here. I've heard talk of things that, in my view, should have been looked at and done 10, 15 years ago. Some of these systems are not, in theory, difficult to put in, but somebody that understands management systems, accountability systems, and I think it incidentally relates to a number of questions that were raised by the committee. I think ethics, demeanor, I think we need people that are ethical. And I would also suggest that we look at somebody with understanding of stakeholder and community management. It sounds like a lot, but I think each one of those, what I would suggest is we spend time. I would like to send this to the committee members that we have, that you can apply your mind to each one of those categories, and then we identify a set of questions in each one, and this we can do at our next meeting, identify a set of questions for each one of these categories. Colleagues, does that make sense? Is it something that you have additions to, you disagree with? What are your views?
I have additions.
And Glensu?
No, two aspects which I agree with the general thrust of the issues you have flagged, which for me are quite important. But I think we should also consider different communities, people from the people living with disability. I think that one should not be ignored. And the LGBTQ plus community, I think such communities ought to be elevated in this instance. Thank you very much. And I think one other aspect which I think was important was an individual with ICT background. That's one other aspect which I think, given the report presented before us, it's important also to consider. Thanks.
So I would suggest then that we take that input and add it under the they refer to race and gender sensitivity. Let's expand that also to the other forms of sensitivity that member Glensu raised, and then in terms of systems that we specifically have ICT, IT. I don't think that's actually the correct expression. The IT or the people in the industry hate it to be called IT, but technological expertise, people with are experts in information systems, that we look at that as a category as well, in terms of to what extent that we can find in our interviews. Right, colleagues, are we in agreement?
Yes, Chairperson, we are.
Right. I will also engage with the procedural officer that we get this summarized and sent to the committee members, that you can think of your questions there. Member Boyson?
Chairperson, out of experience, and I'm relating that to myself when it comes to ICT. In ICT, you get an ICT expert, and you get somebody who understands ICT. So maybe we should say / understanding.
Yeah, we're looking after somebody that understands the value of it and has insight and how it can be applied to improving the operations of the liquor authority. Having said that, when it comes to the terminology, Member Boyce and I, well, your name says memory, so you probably have more experience there in that field than myself. So I defer to your superior knowledge there. Colleagues,
phobia.
We'll find the right wording when we send it out, when we formulate it. But I think we all agreed there. Then I just want to get clarity also in terms of timelines. I would suggest that we finalize the questions and the exact schedule of interviews, that we finalize that at our next meeting. We don't have to spend the entire meeting on it, I think, if we do our homework. But by when do we need to fill these vacancies? If you can just refresh our memory, Mr. Matthews.
Chair, there was no deadline indicated in any of the correspondence other than that it is urgent.
Member Boyson.
Chairperson, May I propose that by end of June it should be finalized? Even appointments for that matter.
So let's put it like this: at our next meeting, we finalize the questions and the schedules, and in the meeting after that, that we finalize that, unless there's something really problematic. When it comes to urgency, we do it as quickly as possible and as slowly as necessary. So that you know the expression. Colleagues, I can't see the online hands. I just want to check whether I've included everyone. That seems to be fine. So then we can go to the next item on the agenda, the considering and adopting of draft documents. Mr. Matthews, we are in your hands.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite a bit. Let me just explain that 4 of the minutes, it's actually just to account for the fact that we had public hearings. So it's not really detailed. It's just accounting for the fact that we had the public hearings. Obviously, the input from those hearings were recorded elsewhere when the committee did its consideration. Then there were just minutes from the end of March. And then there's also an annual activity report, which is an account of the committee's activities for that financial year, which is the previous one. It is slightly tricky in the sense that the committee was only constituted, I think, June, July last year, but there was some committee activity from your predecessors, for lack of a better term, because there was some activity done just before the election, so that had to be in to account for the entire financial year. That activity is in there. So, Chair, if you allow me, could I do it in chronological order?
Just before you proceed, when you have a situation where there's a crossover from one administration to the next, is it something the committee adopts or the committee notes? I think that's quite important, quite an important distinction.
I think that because this report, you're not adopting a report from activities like an oversight visit that was conducted. That report was adopted by that committee. So this is just an account that this event had taken place. It's not a adoption of the report itself.
It's for noting.
Yeah, you could say it's for noting, okay. And then if you want, you can say the committee adopts the report without amendments and notes the activities that were
done previously.
Yeah, done previously. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got clarity. So over to you, Mr. Matthews, if you can take us through it chronologically.
So we'll start off with the library bill, which was the 20th of March. This was when, 20th of March. This was when the department presented to the committee. I think it was a Thursday, sorry. So this is just a briefing on the bill, just accounting for the fact that the department went through the bill clause by clause and saw to any questions from the committee, and the committee making its decisions on how it will carry forward with the public hearing process.
Colleagues, can I ask for a proposer? Our memory stick, okay. Member Boyson, seconder, Member Kaiser Philander.
Chair, on the budget meeting of 31 March, it was on vote 13.
Can I ask for a proposer? Member Kaiser Philander.
Second, Chair.
Member Boyson. Now, the two members have an advantage because they're physically here. So I am relying, if somebody else wants to fall over their feet to second or propose and they're online, please make your voice heard. You are not allowed 2 votes in this committee because you're both present and online, Member Gwensu.
Then Chair,
Next one.
sorry, Chair, the 1st of April, which was vote 4. That was police oversight and community safety.
Colleagues, I'm asking for a proposer.
Proposed, Chair.
Member Boyson. Seconder, Member Kaiser-Philander.
Then Chair, we're heading into the public hearings that took place. It's just an account of the fact that each of the hearings had taken place. We have to have minutes for it.
Yeah, no, well, look, it's essentially just to, it's for essentially for accounting purposes. Well, it's yeah.
So this is the Mariatsburg one.
So colleagues, keep in mind the real record of the meeting. It's the recordings from it. So this is from a committee perspective to, and I would imagine as to do with the expenditure and the accounting, the systems accounting. Yes, so this is also fairly straightforward. If I can ask for a proposer of this report.
Proposed, Chair.
Member Kaiser-Philander. Technically, this gentleman excused himself for the public hearing, so we might just technically it needs to be somebody else.
Caledon hearing.
Okay, Caledon. So no, sorry. Let's just get a seconder on the first one. We'll have to go online, I suspect. Member Kassam.
Chair yourself, Member Philander.
Okay, I'll propose as the chair if I can get a seconder. I think that. Okay, I'll second then on that first one. So, then the second public hearing, I propose adoption.
Seconded, Chair.
The next one.
This is the Cape Town hearing, which was, I think it was the room or the chamber.
Actively canvass the people for inputs here. It's
Proposed, Chair.
Member Kaiser-Philander proposes and I second.
And the final one is the virtual hearing, which took place on the 30th of April as well.
Yeah, I propose adoption.
Seconded, Chair.
Okay, so what else do we have there in terms of housekeeping?
We have the last set of minutes. That was the previous committee meeting on the 15th. That was to consider the bill.
Colleagues, if I can remember, Glensu, you can, this is now where you are back in business. So just in terms of the report, can I ask for proposers? This is now for the meeting we had to deliberate on the bill, library bill.
Stage, clause by clause.
Yeah. There's okay. Okay, can I have a seconder? Okay, remember Glensu is seconding. I'm getting better there. And then
Chair, the last one is the annual activity report. As you can see, there's acknowledgement of the 6 Parliament members at the end of April 2025. And then when this committee was constituted in July, there was a slight membership change because the original ATC, I think it was 4th of July, there was a change in membership by 1 member the following ATC. So Member Kassim came into the committee for another member. There was an ATC of membership, but the committee didn't sit anything. The members were ATC'd, and then the following day there was a new ATC, and that's when we elected the chairperson.
Can I propose then the following? I propose adoption of the report in as far as it covers this committee's activities.
Yes.
And I propose that we note the part that did not fall within the ambit of this committee's activities. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Seconded, Chair.
Right. Colleagues, anything else we need to take care of? I don't see.
That's me for admin, Chair.
Colleagues, then next, I think we have set up what our next meeting is going to be partly about. I would also suggest, because there's been a couple of proposals that I've received, I would like us, while we're busy with budgets and bills and legislation, get back to the oversight side of things. So I would like at the next committee meeting also our oversight report to serve, that we can engage with it. So, yeah, thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
Chair, sorry to interject. The interviews, are members going to decide when we discuss it? Do you want the interviews to be in person or virtual? Because members are here in person.
No, Chair. Thank you very much, Matthew, for raising that point. I suggest that we make interviews in person, and that will help a great deal. It doesn't suggest that I'm primitive, but given the current moment, we need it.
I would suggest so. Our next meeting, we said we're dealing with the questions, basically preparing ourselves for the meeting, and then the subsequent meeting we use for interviews. Member Kaiser Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I think in terms of the questions, that is might be something that can be considered to be held either hybrid or virtually. I do agree with the member in terms of the interviews itself. That should be an in-person engagement. And then, Chairperson, I think us as the committee also have the faith and the trust in you and the procedural officer to indulge the parliamentary program and come up with dates for us to finally approve. So we would like to give you that authority to engage with the parliamentary program and then come up with dates as to how we will continue with the process going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I don't see any other hands, so thank you very much, and we will convene and we'll as discussed, or proceed as discussed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
you.